For centuries, a naval battle was, well, a pretty simple and brutal affair. You'd just sail your ship up to an enemy ship, crash right alongside it, and then fight it out hand to hand. But then, the age of the cannon came along and changed absolutely everything. It turned naval combat from this chaotic free-for-all into a deadly, geometric science. And this is the story of that incredible evolution from a brawl to the broadside.
So what you're hearing here is from Admiral Collingwood. He was second in command at the legendary Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, and he's describing his commander's totally radical plan. You see, for over 100 years, naval battles had been fought with this rigid, exact order. Fleets sailed in one perfect line, blasting away at each other. But for Admiral Nelson, this order wasn't a strength. It was a cage. And his plan? Well, it was to shatter it.
So, to really get the genius behind Nelson's impetuous attack, we first have to understand the very system he was rebelling against. How on earth did the single line of battle, an idea that was born of pure genius, become a kind of tactical prison? And how did a new generation of commanders finally figure out how to break free? All right, so our story really gets going back in the 16th century. Navies were just struggling to put some kind of order onto the total chaos of the sea. The big idea was to transform a fleet from just a bunch of individual ships fighting their own battles into one single cohesive weapon, a floating wall of cannons. This comparison really captures that fundamental shift in thinking. On the left, you've got the old way, basically a brawl. It's all about individual heroics, boarding parties, total chaos. But on the right, you see the new ideal, a disciplined machine. The focus isn't on single ships anymore. It's on the coordinated power of the whole fleet's broadside, all those cannons firing as one. So how did this happen? Well, it started around 1530 with Spanish thinkers like Alonso de Chaves. He argued that ships were kind of like war horses on land and could be organized into formations. But it was the English, over a century later, who really perfected the whole concept. During the incredibly brutal Anglo-Dutch Wars, they formalized what they called the line-ahead formation, and then, in 1653, they literally wrote it into the rulebook. Article 3 was simple and absolute. Keep in line with your commander. Just like that, the cannon wall was born.
But here's the thing. This brilliant innovation would pretty soon become its own burden. What started as a huge breakthrough in tactics would slowly harden into this rigid dogma that actually ended up stifling naval warfare for generations.
In 1703, the British Admiralty issued the Permanent Fighting Instructions. I mean, the name pretty much says it all. These rules made the line of battle sacred. A captain's main job was no longer to destroy the enemy, but to just maintain his position in the formation. Think about that. An admiral could be court-martialed for breaking the line, even if it meant winning the battle. For a staggering 80 years, let that sink in, 80 years from 1703 to 1783, these instructions totally dominated the seas. And the result? Well, it was predictable, a long, dreary series of indecisive battles where two perfectly parallel lines would just sail past each other, blaze away for a few hours, and then sail off to get repaired, with neither side ever really gaining an advantage. And this led to this incredible irony. The line of battle, the very system that was designed to maximize a fleet's firepower and win battles, had become so rigid that its main purpose was simply to preserve itself. The tool had become the objective, and actually winning was like a secondary concern.
But by the late 18th century, a new generation of admirals started to question the dogma. They started to realize that winning required more than just perfect formation. It required flexibility, it required initiative, and it required a ruthless focus on the actual objective.
This shift really kicked off with visionary admirals like George Rodney and Richard Howe. They started issuing their own additional instructions just to get around the permanent rules. New, more complex signal books were developed that let commanders communicate more than just form line or attack. They realized the goal wasn't just to trade cannonballs, it was to achieve a decisive victory. And the key they figured out was concentration, hitting one part of the enemy's line with overwhelming force before the rest of their fleet could even react. And this way of thinking led to the ultimate heresy, breaking the line. Yeah, instead of sailing parallel, an admiral would steer his fleet directly through the enemy's formation. Now, this was a huge risk, a massive gamble, but the payoff could be immense. It would shatter the enemy's cohesion and let the attacking ships rake them from both sides, concentrating all their fire on a smaller, isolated part of the enemy fleet. Which brings us right back to where we started, Admiral Nelson at Trafalgar.
You see, his plan wasn't just some random act of aggression. No, it was the culmination of 3 centuries of tactical learning. It combined the best of the old system with the absolute genius of the new.
Nelson's plan was nothing short of a masterpiece of synthesis. He took the discipline of the old line, but he applied it to smaller, way more flexible columns. He used those new advanced signal books to give his captains an unheard-of amount of freedom to act on their own initiative. And he fully embraced that new focus on a single, decisive goal, not just to defeat the enemy, but to completely annihilate them.
This slide shows the beautiful and frankly terrifying simplicity of his idea. On one side, you've got the larger Franco-Spanish fleet, all laid out in a single traditional line stretching for miles. And then on the other side, there's Nelson's smaller fleet, not in one line, but in 2 separate columns, sailing directly at the enemy's center like 2 giant spears.
The genius of this perpendicular attack was that it created maximum confusion. The enemy just couldn't tell where the blows were going to land. The front section of their fleet, the van, was effectively paralyzed, just sailing on uselessly, while Nelson's 2 columns smashed right through their center and rear, overwhelming them ship by ship in this chaotic close-quarters brawl Nelson called the pell-mell. He had used 300 years of rules to create the perfect moment of chaos.
Nelson's victory at Trafalgar was really the final brilliant expression of naval tactics in the age of sail. It was a victory won not by ignoring the rules, but by understanding them so deeply that he knew exactly how and when to break them. And that leaves us with a final thought, right? What are the rigid, unquestioned fighting instructions in our own fields, our own industries, or even our own thinking that are just waiting for someone with the courage and insight to sail right through them?